Is the drive to modernise Saudi Arabia taking a wrong turn? More women activists are arrested days before the kingdom lifts its ban on female drivers. As economic, political and cultural reforms are implemented, are Saudi leaders sending out mixed messages? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. Today with me, Peter Dobbie. Female activists continue to be arrested in Saudi Arabia, 2 in the past 3 days. Rights groups say Mia al-Zahrani was detained for her posts on social media expressing support for Nouf Abdul Aziz al-Jawrawi, who's also been locked up. Saudi security forces have arrested 17 activists in the past month, most of them women who've long campaigned for the right to drive a car. Now that is about to happen in 2 weeks' time. The first driving licences have been issued before the kingdom lifts its controversial men-only ban. State media has accused the arrested activists of being foreign agents. The Saudi Vision 2030 is a plan to reduce dependence on oil, but reforms proposed by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman are controversial in the religiously conservative kingdom. Dozens of members of the royal family, government ministers and businessmen were arrested in a purge against corruption. Most were released after giving up their assets or paying billions of dollars to the government. Bin Salman's pledge to move Saudi to a more open and tolerant interpretation of Islam. The reforms affect education, law and the courts, traditionally controlled by the religious leaders in the country. For the first time in history, Saudi women are being allowed to drive and to attend sports events. An almost 40-year ban on cinemas and cultural events has ended. Bin Salman plans to build the world's biggest sovereign wealth fund, as well as a $500 billion futuristic city called Neom, and a stake in the national oil company Aramco is up for sale. Okay, there we are. Here we go. Let's bring in our guests. From London, we're joined by Sami, Hamdi, Editor-in-Chief of International Interest, that's a current affairs analysis magazine with a focus on the Middle East. And from Amman on Skype, Suad Abu-Dayyeh, the MENA Regional Consultant for Equality Now. And also from London, Mamdouh Salameh, an international oil economist. Welcome to you all. Sami, Hamdi, if I can come to you first, just explain to us, for you, why do you think women are being detained in this way in Saudi Arabia?
I think what we have to understand is that the whole allowing women to drive in Saudi Arabia was mainly a PR move. It was not designed by Mohammed bin Salman to be a sweeping revolutionizing the Saudi system. However, the problem in Saudi Arabia now is that because they've allowed the women to drive for Mohammed bin Salman, suddenly the activists are asking for more. They're asking for too much at too quick a change. Something that Mohammed bin Salman is not prepared to do, and something that he perhaps cannot do, because the pace of change, if it is too quick, it invites a revolt. It invites protests domestically from the religious authorities and even from the common people, from the common population. Because we have to be aware of one thing in terms of how these reforms are being received and how liberalization is being received. It's being seen as a copy-paste version of Europe, in that those advocates of liberalization are seeking to establish almost another quasi-European state in Saudi Arabia. I say this because the European version of liberalization emerged in the aftermath of the bitter war with the church, and as a result it relegated the religious influence to the personal and private sphere. The Arab world or the Islamic world has no equivalent of this war, this bitter, traumatic war that Europe went through. In other words, Islam in the Arab world and the Islamic world is considered akin to prosperity, to glory, to everything associated with the Golden Age. So when Mohammed bin Salman is bringing in concepts from Europe, from America, when it's being pushed by the US, by Europeans, by liberal activists, there is a sort of reservation amongst Arab society in general, not just Mohammed bin Salman. So even if Mohammed bin Salman wants to implement these measures, he's very wary that there will be a backlash. You have to remember that in Arab society, they are taught that it is the pious Saladin who conquered Jerusalem. It is the pious Ibn Sina who was the father of medicine. It was the pious Abu Hamid al-Ghazali who inspired St. Thomas Aquinas, who inspired Adam Smith, the father of economics. It was the pious Al-Jabir who established algebra. In other words, it's all to do with religion. So when Mohammed bin Salman is talking about liberalization, talking about moderate Islam, talking about a more tolerant Islam, These are rhetoric, this is rhetoric that is dominant in Europe and in the US, and it has been received with much reservation in the Arab world. So in terms of these activists who've been arrested, I think the key problem is this. Mohammed bin Salman is basically saying to them, don't get overexcited. I let you drive and I gave you the right to drive, but you guys are pushing this pace way too much and way too fast. And this big hysteria that you have, you need to calm down. So I need to teach you a lesson and put you in prison for a bit.
Okay, you've laid out all the main issues here that we're going to discuss in the next half hour. Suad, Abu-Dayyeh, do we know where these women are, what sort of conditions they're living under, and more to the point, do we know when they'll be released?
Well, we don't really have any information about where these women have been, in which prison they are. We don't have information from Saudi Arabia. There is a complete silence from actually the government also about where they are and why they have been arresting them. In addition, even the activists who are still outside the prison or who have not been arrested, they are also afraid to reveal any information if they know. So the situation is very much alarming in Saudi Arabia, and maybe I contradict or I am not really supporting what my colleague has said a little bit about, having all these developments in Saudi Arabia as a westernized issues. This is not quite true. I am living in Jordan, and I am all my life I am an Arab and Palestinian, and we are witnessing so many amendments and so many developments in regard to the developments of and enhancement of women's rights in the region. Sorry. If you look at what's going on in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Algeria, even in Jordan, last year they have repealed some parts, some articles in the penal code where rape laws has been repealed in Jordan and in Lebanon. So the women's movements in the region, they are calling for their rights for years by now. It's not really a westernized issue. It is more that women are aware that they are citizens and they need to be treated as citizens in their communities and then in their societies.
Understood.
So
I just want to take a couple of those points and boil those down and put them to Mamdouh Salameh. Mamdouh Salameh, if you're MBS, if you're the Crown Prince and you have a reform programme, surely a reform programme is a whole. It's an entity. You can't reform a little bit. You've got to reform everything. You've got to be more liberal. You've got to be more outward looking. And that's what we're talking about today, I guess, is a symptom of that as opposed to a cause of that.
Well, let me start by saying that Saudi Arabia and its budget depend on the oil resources to the tune of 90%. And since the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia in 1938, they have never diversified their economy. Now they are talking, and they talked before, about diversification. So Vision 2030 is another name for diversification, i.e. reducing dependence on oil in their economy. Still, I don't think that the reform program covered by Vision 2030 will achieve much. I must admit it's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it will achieve much, and certainly not in the short term. For instance, when the vision was launched in 2016, it included a clause that said they need to create 10 million jobs because unemployment among the young in Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi population is very young indeed. They needed 10 million jobs before 2020. I don't think that will be achievable in even 20 years, short of expelling expatriates out of Saudi Arabia. Then you are talking about reforming the oil industry. The talk has been for the last more than 50 or 60 years, and they have not achieved much. They are still dependent on oil, and they are still excessive in their spending of the oil wealth of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
You talk about education, and you find that their universities, or most of them, are not geared to produce people who are employable in the 21st century.
Okay, Sami Hamdi, let's put that point to you. It occurs to me that raising a voice is an offence, but it's not being codified as being something that we could number, that we could label, because, for example, one of the women drivers, her lawyer has been detained as well, simply for talking about this in public. So if you go public about the issue, what's going on there?
I think, Peter, this is nothing new. This has been the Arab world for the last 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, if you're talking to me as an Arab, this doesn't feel like anything strange. This is what governments have been doing for ages. Sisi's doing it just across the border. In most of the Arab countries, these things take place as well. I just want to mention, Peter, in terms of the honorable guest who said that, that it's not the problem with westernization. I'm not saying that, I'm talking about the perception. People are perceiving this as a westernization, as Mohammed bin Salman trying to bring in westernization. And even if we talk about personal experiences, living in Jordan or the like, we should be aware that there are some very important signs about the resistance to liberalization that is taking place in the Arab world. Think about the elections after the Arab Spring. In the first free and fair elections, who dominated? It was Islamist-leaning parties. They're the ones who dominated. The liberals were very, very far behind. Look at the reaction to this Turkish drama on Netflix, Dirilish Ertuğrul, which is taking the Muslim world by storm. Why? It doesn't have any special Hollywood epic scenes. It's only because the hero is somebody who believes his success comes from God or comes from his religion. In other words, this is there, it's deeply rooted in society. And the reason why I say this is because the implementation of liberalization as it's being advocated today is counter to what many people in the Arab society want. In other words, it's coming in as, you have to think about it. Why is liberalization in the Arab world? According to many Arabs, according to many Muslims, it is the result of a rabid colonial oppressor who came in and demolished an Islamic empire that had deviated from Islamic principles. So in other words, liberalization today is simply the victor imposing their own values on a people. The Arab societies are saying, look, you have a ready-made recipe for success. It is in Islam and Islamic principles. If we're talking about women's rights, Islam guarantees human rights. Pursue it in the framework of Islam. Don't pursue it in the framework of liberalization, Suad, which has no relevance.
On that idea, Suad, of a country becoming liberal, can a country like Saudi Arabia liberalize itself unless it has a genuine liberal leadership? Because what Sami seems to be saying is that people are prepared to protest as and when they want to get more liberal rights, and yet they are gifted to them and taken away by people who are completely illiberal.
Yeah, I think, not just for Saudi Arabia, I think we need a time. And I think change is becoming very slow, in the region, but surely it will come. I really believe that, of course, now, there isn't any genuine, really political will in Saudi Arabia, so to speak, about really liberating women and also granting women their rights. Still, for example, male guardianship system is there. Women, they can't travel abroad because they have to have the permission of their male guardian, either their fathers, their brothers, their husbands, whatever. The right to even study abroad, they have to be accompanied by a male guardian. So yes, there are still, we are living in a very harsh situations as women in the region, but I think slowly but surely the advancement and the progressive developments of women's position will be coming very slowly but surely. As I mentioned, we are witnessing lots of developments in other regions. Tunisia in March 2000 this year, I participated in a demonstration where women's groups, human rights organizations, political parties, they are demanding for equal inheritance rights. So this is for us in the Arab region is quite a very progressive step that women are taking lead and asking for their rights, because we are living in a different life. You know, women now are heading the families.
Tyranny of a minority.
They are. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Sami. What was the point you were trying to make?
It is a tyranny of the minority. I'm saying using the example of inheritance is a very, very bad example, only because it does not take into account the context of society, the other rules in society. It cannot be called progressive. What SIPSI has done here is appeal to an international audience, a secular audience, at the expense of a majority semi-conservative society. It is a tyranny of the minority, what SIPSI is doing in Tunisia. But the rest of your points, I mean, I can agree with that. Women's rights, definitely, there should be more progress on that.
Okay, just one point to Mamdouh Salameh in London. How much of this, you've already touched on this, how much of this, say when we look at a situation surrounding the company Aramco, is about a country's ability to look outward instead of being insular and looking in on itself? There are other countries in this region that are quite outward looking, and they are, or they have successfully diversified into other industries because they're playing a long game. The game is as long as the game that Saudi Arabia is playing, but Saudi Arabia still behaves as if it expects the rest of the world to come to Riyadh, as opposed to Riyadh going to the rest of the world.
Well, sooner or later, they will need the world to deal with them and help them. The diversification program you referred to is not going to achieve much shortly. When you talk about Saudi Aramco, which is the main source of income for Saudi Arabia, they are talking about the IPO, which is the initial public offering of selling 5% of Saudi Aramco, not the productive assets of oil, but different assets for $100 billion. That is not going to happen, and I will tell you why. Because the Saudis have valued the IPO at more than $100 billion. That cannot be right, because based on the proven reserves of oil they have, many organizations, including Wall Street Journal and the World Bank and many other analysts, said that the value could be based on smaller proven reserves. Saudi Arabia says it has proven reserves of 268 billion barrels. My research shows that that is between 80 and 90 billion. And many other experts also agree with that. So if you base the IPO value on that smaller reserves, I think the value of the IPO is between 50 to 75 billion. Still, Saudi Arabia, with the rising oil prices now, it does not have to sell any percentage in the Saudi Aramco. It doesn't need the money financially with the improvement of oil prices. That's why I say the IPO is not going to happen. What will happen in diversification is concentrate on adding value to your oil exports. Instead of exporting oil as crude oil, export it as refined products, more petrochemicals. Saudi Arabia could, within the next 2 or 3 years, dominate the petrochemical industries in the world and become the major producer and the major exporter. Furthermore, they can use even 5% of their oil revenue to expand food production. That's an important part. Saudi Arabia imports more than $30 billion a year of food materials, mostly coming from the United States.
Okay. Your key point, Mamdouh, is clear then. You're basically saying they have had and they will continue to have an awful lot of money in the bank so they can absorb the hit. Suad, to what degree is this a difficult course? Suad, one question to you. To what degree is this a difficult course for bin Salman to plot, in as much as when there was the Vogue magazine cover of a Saudi princess posing in a car because she's got her driver's license or she will have her driver's license, there was a backlash against that, not against per se women driving, but against the fact that MBS has opened up this Pandora's box, his critics might say, of cosmetic changes. But how easy is it for him to partially close that Pandora's box?
Well, I really didn't see the ad that you are mentioning about the Princess of Saudi Arabia driving and the whole debate about that. But I want really to comment on what my colleague has just mentioned, is that yes, I mean, I don't agree with him that what I have mentioned about Tunisia is a negative or a bad example, because this is just to show and indicate that women are, asking for their rights in our countries, to the extent that it might, according to some interpretations, it might contradict Islam and the Sharia. So this is one aspect of that. I mean, if we want to concentrate on women driving in Saudi Arabia, I don't think it is just the issue of women, just calling for the driving. They have been activists for years, calling for ending male guardianship system, which controls every aspect of their life. I think we have, the right as women in the region and elsewhere to be treated as citizens in the countries. We have lots of discrimination in the law and in the implementation of the laws and in our cultures. Although we have sometimes good traditions and cultures where women should be respected, and and even Islam, they provide women with respect and so on. But still, discrimination is there, and we need to change the attitudes of people, by working with the communities. I really believe that it is a long process, a slow process, but we have to dig and continue. Women in the region has been working for years, and still discrimination is there.
Okay, we are heading towards the end of the programme very, very quickly. So one more point to Sami Hamdi in London. What is it about the Saudi leadership that they appear to be tone deaf to the nuances that other countries are expecting them to apply when it comes to this process of becoming more liberal and opening up?
I think the liberals don't give Saudi a break. I mean, you have to think about, there's a lack of, like I explained at the beginning, there's a lack of understanding as to just how deeply embedded these religious influences are. I mean, what do you want Mohammed bin Salman to do? To go banging down on every single door and telling everybody it's time to be liberal? This is if he wants to implement it, it has to be a process. But also his Western allies don't help him at all by forcing him into a position to be pro-Israel in the Israel-Palestine cause. I mean, the biggest problem is this in the Muslim world. There is a very stark comparison to Mohammed bin Salman in the region. That is Erdogan. Erdogan is unashamedly Muslim. He rebuked Angela Merkel publicly for using the term Islamist terrorism. He opposed Trump's ban, and he's defying Washington. You compare that to Mohammed bin Salman, who is going to Washington and pleading to be king, or Mohammed bin Zayed in UAE justifying Trump's travel ban. There is a dichotomy now in the region, and many people prefer Erdogan's approach because it's more Islamist. The Western allies are telling Mohammed bin Salman, you need to be quicker. Mohammed bin Salman is sitting there in his chair thinking, if I go too quick,
I want to put the last point of the programme to Mamdouh Salameh in London as well. In 30 seconds, Mamdouh, because we are out of time. If these women who've been detained praised the government and thanked them for the right to drive, as opposed to praised the campaigners who they might say got them the right to drive, would they now not be under detention?
Well, rather than answer that question in direct way, I will say that we will not see any reforms regarding women or any other reforms in Saudi Arabia in the short term. I would venture to say we wouldn't see it even in 25 years. You have to separate the aspects of religion from running a country, a modern country. And that cannot be reconciled in Saudi Arabia in my lifetime, if not further beyond.
Okay, we must leave it there. Thank you all so much for your time today. Thanks to all our guests. From London, Sami Hamdi, who joined us from the British capital. In Amman, we had Suad Abu-Dayyeh. And also in London, we had Mamdouh Salameh. And thank you too for your company here on Inside Story. You can see the show again, of course, anytime via the website, aljazeera.com. And for more discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can tweet me. I'm at Peter Dobbie1. Or you can find the programme on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll do it all again at the usual time tomorrow. Bye-bye.